So later, when CBS pursued General Westmoreland, and there was a huge battle between CBS and Westmoreland, and he sued CBS for, I think it was slandering his character. There was a character assassination, and he actually won, which was too bad. But they suggested that he had massively goofed at Quezon, and they were right. Then he sues the journalists and CBS. It itself became an enormous story. There's a famous book about that by Don Knowet. I think it is Knowet, Knowet. It may be Kowet, Kowet. And it's something like, it's a sort of obvious title, like, no, it's a matter of honor, I think. It's a matter of honor, CBS and General Westmoreland. Can't remember. Anyway, if you're interested, let me know. So myths about the NVA began to grow because, after all, they had weathered the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas worth of explosives that had been dropped on them, and they stayed. This is in this one siege. They inflicted heavy losses when they were pinned down, and they had no air cover. They had no helicopters. They had no fighter planes. They had no bombers. And the thing just wasn't working out until with the way the American narrative was expected to go, and the Americans always sort of portrayed themselves as the underdog. Well, here they were no underdog. The underdog was the Vietnamese, crouching in the forest, crouching in the jungle, basically, and surviving and doing better than just surviving. And so the question here is that, did the question here from the Americans, who were busy being pushed back and made to look bad and so on, so they started to say, do these Asians not value their lives? Now, this is a very old trope that when America began to fight the Japanese in World War II, they just didn't understand the Japanese worldview at all. They didn't understand kamikaze pilots. They didn't understand the way that they didn't understand banzai charges. They didn't understand the fact that Japanese were prepared to sacrifice themselves, basically in what they considered to be honorable battlefield deaths, which is an entirely part of the Japanese worldview. Is a very different worldview than the American one. I mean, they could hardly be more different in many ways. So this is the basis for this feeling that Asians don't value their lives. This was underscored in Korea when the Marines, who were few relatively, were attacked by massed armies of Chinese soldiers, and they used to joke about, because most armies are organized into platoons, and in platoons there's a squad and so on, and above the platoon it's a company, and then it's I always forget this, then it's a brigade, I can't remember, and then it's the regiment, and then it's the battalion. I'm sorry, I cannot remember these terms. So what happens if you're not a military person? It's like, it's pretty much meaningless to you. It's a hierarchy. But in the Chinese army, it looked as though basically the platoons were massed people who just sort of rushed at the Americans. And then there was the whole sort of discussion about how Asians fought and so on. And the Marines used to joke about this and say, how many hordes in a Chinese platoon? Because they just talked about the Chinese hordes. And first of all, they couldn't tell people apart. All Asians look the same, and so on. So all these usual sort of typical racist expectations that, as I say, were imported from World War II. Okay, and then from Korea. Well, these arrived in Vietnam. And by the time they got to Quezon, the Americans, who were really pressed, began to say, they don't value their lives. We value our lives, but they don't value their lives. And this is going to be important in this next clip with Westmoreland. So here is the boss, and speaking about the value of Asian lives. And then I've added to that another clip from the Green Berets, which
Mày nắm không? Ôi bà ơi là bà ơi con ơi là con ơi. Tôi đã xuống tại sao ơi. Cho tôi đi luôn. Tôi đi luôn, tôi đi luôn.
Chúng tôi đi.
Tôi không khỏe được.
Bà nghe chúng tôi.
Thôi quý vị có mau rồi đi con.
Bà yên đây.
Bây giờ này rồi.
Well, the Oriental doesn't put the same high price on life as does the Westerner. Life is plentiful, life is cheap in the Orient. And as the philosophy of the Orient expresses it, life is not important.
Peterson?
Yeah.
What was all that about ladders and coffins?
Oh, and Charlie knows he's got a nice box to be buried in, why, he's just as brave as hell.
The ladders?
They throw the ladders across the wire to get at us, and later they use them for litters.
By later on, you mean when everybody's dead?
Everybody. Women. Children. Everybody.